welcome to this Empowered demo. And what we're going to be looking at in this Empowered demo is the quality control module in Empowered. Once you've installed Empowered, you'll see at the top over here, you'll get in all of your role centers an Empowered menu. And if you go through there, you will see that you have the quality control module in there. And this is where you get your quality control documents and your archived quality control documents. But before we use it, we've got to set it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to quality control setup, and then let's open that up. And in the setup page, there's only a couple of small things that you've got to define over here. So what you've got to do is first, every quality document that we generate, you've got to give it a number. So we've got to assign a number series to the quality documents. Then over here, we can assign a quality control responsible person. So who is the default person that is responsible for quality control? So when a quality control document is generated, this person will be defaulted onto the documents. I'll show you another place in a little while where we can set up another person on another level, but this is just a default value. Of course, every time a quality document is created, you have the liberty of changing it. Then whenever a quality control fails, sometimes we quarantine and sometimes we just reject the receipt of the stock, for instance. But when we need to quarantine, we need to say in what bin would we like to quarantine those items. So we can also have the system auto-fill the quarantine bin on the receipt process or on the output process. I'll show you where that gets affected a little bit later on. So over here, if you want those bins to be auto-filled, you tick those two. I'll just leave them off for now. In the related menu over there, what we're going to do is we're going to go and set up all related things. So first one is the document types. So this actually deals with some sort of documentation or certificate that you need to receive from your supplier. So for instance, let's say you get an ISO certificate or a temperature certificate to verify that the temperature of the item during transport was kept below a certain temperature, etc. So what you need to do over here is you need to go and specify the document type. This usually actually more relates to customers and vendors. So unless a vendor has given us his certificate, he's not allowed to supply us. And you'll see over there, I've got order check, invoice check, receipt check, and shipment check. So on the receipting side, so if I'm buying from a supplier, check at the time of ordering whether we have the certificate, or check at the time of invoicing that we have the certificate, or check at the time of receipt, or check at the time of shipment. If it's a customer that we're shipping to, check that at the time we ship to the customer that we actually have that. So here you will set up all the different types of documents that are required. Let's actually just go out and go to a customer over there. And let's just finish showing you guys this one, because this you would set up against a customer. So what you would do is in the customer, if you go here to quality, you go to QC documents. And then against them, you say this guy requires an ISO certificate. You can say over there whether it's a periodic document. So in other words, if this certificate that needs to be issued every 6 months, every year, etc. You can say what was the date on which the certificate was issued and how long is it valid for. And then you'll see that on that date, we have another one that's due. So at the moment, if I receive between those dates, I'm fine. But if I receive, say, for instance, after the 3rd of the 12th, 2025, it's going to warn me and tell me, listen here, you don't have a valid ISO certificate. If I place an order after that specific, or if the customer places an order with me after that specific date. Of course, if it's on the vendor side, when we place an order with the actual vendor, we need to get a new certificate from them. Let's just go back over here to our quality control setup. And let's just go to the rest of our setups over there. So the next one is the quality test definitions. First things we would set up is the test definition. So every kind of test that I need to perform, I'll come and set up something for over here. So a very popular one is on arrival, check whether the temperatures are right, check whether the item's diameters fall within certain parameters, check whether the weights are within certain parameters, etc. So what you can do over here is you can go and say, okay, when an item arrives, the temperature on arrival needs to be checked. And there's 3 types of checks that you can do. There's a text, a decimal, and a Boolean check. And you'll see text just means we need to fill in something. The decimal means that we need to fill in a decimal value, and the Boolean just needs to say we need to place a tick box in there, true or false. For instance, okay check, just visually check that the goods are okay and the boxes aren't damaged, etc. And that's a Boolean field, and we just place a tick mark in there to say yes. Text means we need to fill in some text or whatever, and decimal obviously is a value that we need to fill in. Temperature, for instance, is a decimal check. And it needs to be between 3 and 5 degrees because, we can even possibly make this 1 and 5 degrees because below 1 degree, it's possible that the item has started freezing, etc. Oh, I've gone below the extended lower limit on my lower limit item over there. So let's just discard the changes over there. So we'll say between 3 and 5 degrees. So we don't want it to go below a certain value. So we put in the value over there, say it's 1 degree, because below 1 degree it starts freezing. And we don't want it to go above 5 degrees because above 5 degrees Celsius, for instance, bacteria starts growing. Let's say, for instance, this is a piston parameters. And then over there, we're going to say it's a decimal value. So over here, we would then go and say, what is the diameter of the piston? And it's, the lower limit, it's not allowed to be below a certain value, say 45 millimeters, or, at the upper limit, 55 millimeters, or whatever it might be. This will usually be a couple of microns difference, or whatever it will be. You fill in your values over there, and you set up all of your different tests. So for instance, for a piston, we might want to check the diameter, the depth, the gaps that they've left for the rings, or whatever it is. So you might set up multiple different tests with multiple different values over here. So this is every line over here is usually one value that you would have to measure or one value that you would have to check. Once you've defined your quality test definitions, you would then combine those test definitions together into a quality template. So this is where I now go and go, when I receive a specific piston, we need to check the diameter, we need to check the depth, we need to check the weight, we need to check the balance, we need to check all sorts of different values we actually need to check over here. Now, to create a template over there, you just click on the plus. You would give it a specific code and a specific description. Piston checks on arrival. From what date until what date is this test actually valid? You'll see the status over there is open. So while I'm editing it, we leave the status as open and then we release it once we actually want to start using this specific test. Then at the top right hand side over there, we specify what is the fault resolution code. If there is a fault, what do? We block the receipt of the items. In other words, we say to the supplier, sorry, we can't receive these goods. They're not in good standing. They're not the right values, whatever it might be, we're returning them. Or we can say receive, but put it in quarantine. The receiving guys will usually just receive the items. And it's a lot of the times in warehouse, there's not enough time to test before we can actually reject. So what they generally just do is they'll just generally receive the items and leave it in the receiving area. And then on put away, they will actually, or before put away, they'll actually run the tests. And then when they put it away, they can put it away into the quarantine bin, the items that don't match. Then over here, remember I said we have a default QC responsible on the quality control setup. Here you can override that and say, Dale is responsible for this specific quality template. So by default, when a quality document's created for a piston, it'll actually go and use this person over here. And then the last date modified and modified by, and then once you're ready with this, you can just release this. But before we do that, we've got to go and create our lines over here. So once you have created multiple tests, you can just go and say, which test codes do you actually want over here? So you can go and say, there's the piston parameters needs to be between 45 and 55. On the test, you can specify a lower limit and an upper limit, but you can also specify an extended lower limit and extended upper limit. So sometimes you want to check and make sure that it's within certain narrow parameters. Sometimes you'll allow a little bit of a bigger tolerance. So over here, you will say, do I want to check on the outer specifications? Do I want to check on the normal specifications? And it'll be for different types of tests. You might want to allow the different types of specifications. That's why it allows you two values over there. And then in the unit of measure over there, you can go and say this is in millimeters, or this is in whatever the value is. This is in degrees or whatever it might be. Then you will just go and create multiple lines. Sorry, this first field over there says mandatory. So in other words, this test is mandatory. We're not allowed to close the quality document unless this test has been performed. And this is a blocking test. So in other words, if this test fails, we want you to block the receipt of the items. So sometimes some types of tests will be catastrophic. In other words, if this test fails, we don't want to receive the items. And other times what we'll do is we'll say, if this test fails, we still want to receive the items because we can still actually use it or whatever it might be. But the test that causes it to fail, you would need to specify that this is a blocking test over there. Okay, and then you just literally go ahead and create all of your lines, and once you're ready, you hit the release button at the top, and you'll see the status changes to released and it becomes non-editable. So in other words, this test is now ready for us to actually start using. But how do we know on which items that test actually needs to take place? So if we go back here to our quality control setup, so we've shown you the test definition where we specify each test that needs to be performed, the templates where we combine the tests together. Now we go to our quality test setup over here. And in here is where we will go and say that upon receipting of items, so in other words, when we receive items from a supplier, which item would you like to receive from the supplier? Over here, you can go and specifically pick, let's do, I see 1920 hasn't been used. Let's use the Antwerp conference table over there. You can also say that all items in a specific category. So if you go to the item category over here, you can say all tables, all chairs, all computers, all pistons needs to be subjected to these specific tests. You don't need to specify the item number. You can just specify the category. Or you can specify all items from a specific vendor or all items going to a specific customer. And you can also specify the test only needs to be performed for a specific location. So in other words, all other locations does not perform this test, but only this location performs this specific test. So let's just specifically go and say 1920, our Antwerp conference table, because we only want to run it on that one item. But if, of course, I wanted to run on multiple items, I could specify that. And then template description. What template would you like to use with this? And over here, you would then just go and specify, okay, I want to go and run that piston test. On that item, when it arrives over there, it needs to be between 45 and 55, if I remember correctly, I set it up. This is actually pulled through, these three fields are pulled through from the actual quality template. So you can see what is the description, what is the valid from and to, and is it released or is it open? The next thing over there, I can say unique test. If I have a batch of goods arriving and I need to test the temperature, I will only enter one value because I go with the temperature, whether it's infrared or a probe or whatever it is. I go and take the temperature on a couple of different places and I go, well, on average, it's about 4 degrees, so I put in 4 degrees. You don't test every individual item that you receive. However, if I do test every individual item like a piston, I'm going to need to test every individual item whether it matches the criteria or not. If you do like the temperature and you just sort of generally test and you enter one value, you don't tick the unique code or unique test. But if, of course, I test every single item, I tick the unique test and I say, test every unique item. In a lot of industries receive by lot number, they would have to send it off for a couple of tests, lab tests, for instance. They would get the lab test back and enter the values. And that lab test has to be done per lot that you receive. So if you receive stock out of 2 different lots, you would have to run 2 different tests. So then you say a unique test per lot or unique test per serial number, which basically says that every serial number that I receive, I will do a unique test for. And then we have item plus quantity. And for the life of me, I can't remember exactly what that one does right now. Last one over there is just active. So once I have set up the whole test, I will activate it by ticking the active box over there, a unique test per item, and we tick it as active. And then the last date modified over there is actually shown. And then who was the last person to actually go and modify that. That is my setup. So on the reception of that item, so let's actually go and create a purchase order for item 1920. If I now go and create a new purchase order over there, specify who our vendor is. And of course, before my demo, I never warmed up my environment. So what's happening is the reason you're seeing it as this slow is because this is the first time I'm doing anything on this environment. Once you've created your first purchase order, every second purchase order after that is going to be a lot faster because, of course, all the details is cached. But this environment has been running a day or so. So what's happening now is because I'm starting to use the environment now, it's only starting to wake up now. So it's not usually this slow. It's the first person to log in the morning usually experiences the slowness, and everybody after that, they're actually fine. So let's just go and buy, let's just say 2 items in there. Let's specify a specific warehouse we're buying into. We'll buy into the main warehouse. And off we go. So that's creating the purchase order over there. So once I've created the purchase order, under the quality control, you'll see there is the create quality document. And now, depending on what your warehousing procedure is, so depending on whether you are doing receipts, are you doing putaways, do we just straightforward receipt off of the purchase order, you'll find the same create quality document at every receipting process. Because in Business Central, there's not just one way of receiving stock. So when I go, the main warehouse over here is just set up to receipt the stock straight off the order. So if I go to quality, create quality document over there, that will create the quality document. Let's just open it straight from here as well. And you'll see over there, there's my quality document has now been created. It's telling me for the main warehouse, I have to go and check this specific item. The values have to be between 45 and 55 over there. And if I actually go and enter a value, resulting test value, let's say my test is 50. Result test value is where I fill in if it's a text that I have to enter. Result numeric value is where I go if I have to enter a numeric value. So that's actually where I enter my 50s. And then resulting yes, no value. If it's a Boolean value, I would tick it over there. And then it tells us over there whether the test is actually passed. And the line shows up in green over there if the test is actually passed. Let's just go and enter a value of 56 in there. You'll see the test doesn't pass. Okay. And if I go to the next line over there, you will see the line doesn't go green anymore. So let's just go back and enter 50. And once I've tested all my lines over there, I'm happy with all of my lines. I can go and now that the line is finished testing, I can now go and click on the evaluate document at the top over there. And you'll see that this line over here for the documents comes back and says approved. So it comes back and tells me, listen here, this item has actually been approved over there. And you'll see that this line turns green, this line turns green, and what I can now do is now that the quality document is passed, I can just click on register over there, and I say register quality document. And now if I go back to the purchase order, I can now go and receipt my purchase order. Of course, if I try to receive this purchase order, so if I go to home and I say post and I say receive this stock, if I tried to receive it without doing the quality test, it would stop me and tell me, listen here, you can't do that. And then if the quality document actually passed, there's a button on that quality document that says, if you were to quarantine, that says set quarantine value. And that changes the bin for the receipt on that specific line to the quarantine bin, so that the stock actually goes into the quarantine bin. And then when you receive, you actually receive into the quarantine location as opposed to into the main location. But you'll see over there, if I go to this line, scroll over to the right, quantity to receive, quantity received is now 2, and they were actually received after they've actually passed the test. So that's the basics of the quality control module. Of course, there's a lot of variations that I could actually demo, but for more details, we do have a user manual available on this, so you can just go through the user manual and see how to set up all the different types of scenarios. And thanks for joining us for this demo, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you on the next demo. Have a good day. Bye-bye.